What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday. Today we're going to be talking about something that I've kind of been growing. It's kind of been an idea that's been growing in my head as I've been doing a lot of my afterthoughts commentary on the Patreon. I always do like a 5 to 7 minute talk, closer to 5, after a substantial release as far as what I think about it, sort of uncut, that I don't have to worry about people not understanding it on YouTube or getting their emotions all riled up. But some of the themes that have kept coming up on those are sacrifices. What are we sacrificing? What are we willing to sacrifice, right? So we're going to get into that. I got a number of examples and then some personal commentary, as well as I'm very interested in you guys' opinions. After I explain this, what are you willing to sacrifice for something else? But in order to get there, we kind of got to do some house cleaning. Let's go through the week. So first and foremost, we had our verses with the Motor Masters. Many people were very appreciative, and for that, I am grateful. It does mean something to hear people say, even if they disagree, thanks for the time. I know it took all day. So your appreciation is appreciated. Thank you. But we do have to get into a couple things surrounding it. Of course, there's your typical responses of people trying to wash away their own biases regarding their purchase choices and all that, which is, look, it doesn't matter. They're all good. You don't have to come up with whatever bull theory it is to make yours the best choice or whatever the case may be. There's no need for it. You don't have to put another one down. Like, they're all good for different reasons. And let me give you an example. The scale chart, right? People like the scale chart when it fits their own conformations. People dismiss the scale chart when it doesn't fit their own conformations. The truth is, it doesn't always fit my preferences. It's just all we got. Yes, it's not official in the sense of the Stunticons not being a part of an officially released scale chart. However, it was done with some pride and done fairly accurately. Just because it makes your purchase less valid in the single sense of it not being accurate to the cartoon scale, which is inaccurate all the time, doesn't make the chart wrong or right. It's just all we got. So we have to use it as a common tool. Don't get yourself worked up. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't feel like I put enough of my opinion in that one at the end, probably because I was tired, but I think that the X-Transbots is probably the closest to the tune. I think that the Fans Toys is the best overall, and I think that the DX9 is the most playable. It's the one that you can flip back and forth. It's the most sturdy. It's the most kind of durable. I think they all do different things well. I'm happy to have all three. I have no regrets. But there was an interesting point that was brought up in it, and it was somebody disagreeing with my take on something, and I totally understand where they're coming from. And the point that this gentleman brought up was about articulation. And he basically said that having multiple points of articulation isn't always an advantage because it's how the articulation works in concert. For instance, a knee bend may not mean as much if the ankle tilt doesn't work up, because then you won't be able to get a kneeling position, etc., etc. Great point. You are 100% correct. I couldn't agree with you more. However, I don't know a better system to sort of just do a checks and balances. This has this and this doesn't have this way to do it. But you are 100% right, and I agree. A lot of times, man, like when I do those verses, I don't agree with the results. I don't agree with the results of this one. I don't think that DX9 and X-Transbots are tied. I do think the Fans Toys one is the best overall, but I technically think that the X-Transbots is a better figure than the DX9. I also can make the argument that the DX9 might be a better purchase. Like, it's complicated, and just because I have an objective way to look at it, or the most objective I can come up with at this point in time, doesn't mean that I always agree with the results either. But the results are the results. But I did appreciate that opinion on articulation and what matters in regards to articulation. You're 100% correct. But if I don't do that, then I'd have to go by poses. Like, can you pull off this pose? Can you pull off this pose? And then I'd have to come up with a list of what poses matter, and I'm not sure that I could effectively do that in any way that wouldn't be more biased, because now I'm asking myself what poses matter. And as soon as I have to pose that question, so to speak, I'm now taking an objective look out of it, and I'm now placing my priorities on it. But tremendous point nonetheless. The Takara Tomy Black Arachnia. Look, most of you were like, it's too expensive, and I'm 100% there with you. I don't think it's worth the price, and I don't feel like it's quite up to what I consider to be a masterpiece standard, but I do feel like it's better than the Hound overall. But, you know, my opinion on that is just my opinion on that. It's not based on anything else. There was a gentleman who's cool. He knows him and I have a good relationship. There's no issue, but, you know, it's like, well, you don't like Beast Wars, so you don't like this figure. Like, no, dude, that's not it. Like, because I liked most of the Beast Wars figures. I just don't like this one as much. And I do like this one. I don't think it's terrible. But I often find that individuals will try to explain my opinion to kind of invalidate it somehow, but that's just not the case. I praise Legends figures that I don't collect or care for all the time. I criticize figures that I adore all the time. I'm not suggesting that my biases never play a part in anything. I'm human, of course they do, but I wouldn't get too lost in the woods on that. I try to run it fairly straight down the center, best I can. For Dummies, abandoning a collection, I was fascinated with the responses on there. Such a wide plethora of people collecting things for different reasons, and it was interesting. It was interesting to read the responses of, like, most people aren't collecting, well, a lot of people that commented on that video aren't collecting Masterpiece with the intention of completing a series or a season or what have you. Most of them are just picking and choosing characters. It's interesting to me just to read, like, what people's motivations are, so thank you for those comments. Lastly, Chinese New Year is upon us. Happy New Year to the Chinese. It's the year of the rat, right? Because I heard somebody say that, and it just makes sense because Takashi's getting out of prison. Anyway, often I struggle with having content through the month of Chinese New Year. It ends up being like closer to 2 months that it ends up causing an effect on my channel. I think I'm gonna have enough this year. I don't think I'm in dire straits. I have a ton of stuff that I have to work through that's sitting upstairs on my wife's dining room table, my dining room table as well, that she's not happy about, I assure you, but I'm working through it. I should have at least 2 toy reviews regarding Transformers a week for some time. So rest assured. And now we can get into the conversation. So sacrifices. We all make sacrifices. We make financial sacrifices. We make personal sacrifices regarding biases and all those sorts of things in order to kind of get what we want, right? So I just wanted to give a couple examples of things that I'm willing to sacrifice, things I'm not willing to sacrifice, and I'm very interested in your guys' opinion as to what you're willing to sacrifice. So we're going to start with aesthetics for articulation. This has been an approach that Takara Tomy has taken recently to sacrifice aesthetics in order to pull off more complicated articulation. There is a give and take to that, for sure. We definitely see it in the Sunstreaker. I think that's the first time I really noticed it, where I think they tucked a lot of stuff into a lot of places in order to get more articulation. But this is an example where I think it works extremely well. And ultimately, I do believe it is worth sacrificing that aesthetic. I think that we see it a little bit in the backpack of the Prime, a lot of it in the back of the Megatron. There's got to be a lot more pieces and a lot more things moving in order to get out of the way of other things and other pieces to allow more extreme articulation for the sake of dynamic poses. But it doesn't always work. An example where I can think it doesn't work is I think that the chest is too narrow on Bumblebee. Like, I think he's too slim, but that's to allow the arms to get out in front so he can hold the gun. That's an articulation choice. And they sacrificed an aesthetic in order to do so. And who knows what part that played into all that stuff hanging off of his back. So in regards to sacrificing aesthetics for articulation, I'm not always signed on. It kind of has to make sense. It kind of has to get me close enough to the dance floor to hear the music. And if I can't hear the music, then I'm leaving the party. Plus your playlist might be trash. Either way, I gotta go. Another example, engineering. Sacrificing engineering for aesthetic. And kind of the perfect example that I can give is, of course, our own favorite Fans Toys, whose releases often create difficult challenges in regard to getting them between the two modes. So when I say engineering, I'm talking specifically about the transformation process. My personal opinion is that they are doing this because what matters to them the most are the aesthetics of both bot mode and alt mode. So having to go through the process may just be a price that we have to pay in order to achieve both modes aesthetically. Another example of something that I'm willing to sacrifice in order to achieve the desired goal. Engineering versus aesthetics. I think that a lot of the earlier Takara masterpieces are a lot more fun to transform because they sacrificed aesthetics for engineering. And I still have a lot of those pieces, and I'm super proud and happy of those pieces within my collection. So it's not always a given for me, but it's something to consider. Where I place those in terms of a hierarchy in comparison to one another, I'm not entirely sure. I think Fans Toys RC is the most obvious example of that folly, and I love her. I love the way that she looks on my shelf and all of that. I hate the engineering of it, but I'm not sure that I love her aesthetics all that much more than I love, say, Masterpiece Prowl's aesthetics. I know Robert D disagrees with me there, but it is ultimately the way I feel. Another sacrifice that I often think about are aesthetics versus inclusion. The two greatest examples of this are MMC's Bruticus and, say, for example, Zeta's Bruticus. They're just perfect examples. In my opinion, MMC makes aesthetic sacrifices in order to achieve an all-inclusive combiner piece, both individually in robot mode and combined in gestalt mode. Whereas, I feel like Zeta makes two sacrifices. They sacrifice not having an inclusive unit plus the aesthetics of bot mode in order to achieve a more proportionately accurate and imposing combined mode. Sacrifices being made on both ends prioritize priorities in regards to what those sacrifices mean for your desired goal depend on you. Makes sense. And it's how people kind of put those in order within their purchasing points. So for me, I would have never bought that Zeta Toys Bruticus if my goal was to have them in robot mode. But the same goes for MMCs. I would have never bought MMCs if my goal was to put it in combined mode. And to be fair, I'm not entirely happy with their robot versions, but I do like some of them, and I do prefer some of them over previous offerings, but it has, the reasons why I take issue with some of their offerings is 100% aesthetics, and the aesthetics are sacrificed 1000% for the inclusive combined mode, which the gimmick of is beautiful and smart and genius and all of those things, and I agree. But in terms of priorities for my own collection, doesn't take precedence. Another example, soft goods versus articulation. If we look at Hot Toys, for instance, but also Mezco, both of which use soft goods as an integration into making the item look quote-unquote more realistic, which I think works better for Hot Toys than it does for Mezco, but that's neither here nor there. Oftentimes for both, articulation points are sacrificed at some level in order to achieve the desired aesthetic. I'm not willing to make that sacrifice for Mezco. I am willing to make that sacrifice for Hot Toys, mainly because I want my Hot Toys to stand pretty much stoically and not dynamically, and I also am not crazy about the aesthetic design in regard to that scale of soft goods for Mezco, both of which come down to my own personal priorities regarding sacrifice. I'm willing to sacrifice the articulation here, I'm not willing to sacrifice the aesthetic here, for the same thing in different scales. This is why this stuff has become so interesting to me, because my picking and choosing and my preferences are based on so many different things in regards to what is the ultimate goal for purchasing the item in the first place. One, to a lesser extent for me, because I don't really pew around on the floor with my toys, not a judgment to those who do, it's just not me, is durability versus paint. Having the paint is something that's important to me, as you all know. However, with paint comes the potential for scratches if you're getting them mucked about. When I think of that offhand, I think of stuff like X-Transbots that's been painting the hell out of their figures recently, Fans Toys of course, Takara, but also my Play Arts Kai stuff. All the Play Arts Kai stuff is hand painted. I'm paying a premium price for that. With going through the figure just for the sake of a review, sometimes you're gonna have paint chips, durability versus paint for desired aesthetic. Also, a sacrifice I'd probably be willing to make with Play Arts Kai, but wouldn't be willing to make with a Marvel Legend. Which brings us to things that I'm not willing to sacrifice. I'm not willing to sacrifice the build and materials for price. When I think of that sacrifice, I immediately think of NECA. They know how to sculpt a figure, they know how to paint a figure, and they know how to keep that price relatively low. But with that low price comes, in my opinion, poorer materials and weaker builds. And generally, I'm not willing to accept that. I do make exceptions from time to time based on my priorities in regard to what I want to see on a shelf, but as a general rule, I'm not accepting that. Limited articulation, poor build, poor materials in order to create well-sculpted, well-painted things at a cheaper price point. Not going to happen. McFarlane Toys is something else that springs to mind in that regard. Not necessarily their newer stuff, but certainly their older stuff, where they might have one or two articulation points, but they created something that looks beautiful. And then there's the rare things like Masterpiece Hound, which I feel like sacrifices build and material, but doesn't give you the other things that sacrifice to include a cheaper price point. That's when I become completely turned off by the product altogether. So that takes us into quality versus price. So unlike the Hound, where I'm not willing to sacrifice quality for a high price, I'm also not willing to sacrifice quality for a low price. Things that come to mind to me are two opposite ends of the spectrum. On one hand, I'm not really interested in Hasbro's mainline Transformers because I'm not really interested in a lower quality item at a cheaper price point. At the same time, I am interested in Flames Toys stuff because I am interested in higher quality items even if it's at a higher price point. However, I'm picky. Now I'm picky because you've outpriced my general completionist sort of mind state. But all of this comes down to what we see as the most important aspects of figures within our collection, and then how we view our collection being displayed or utilized in terms of our needs. So it's preference and priority, and that's what makes stuff good to us. I'm out. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Till next time, take care.